Modern Christians are making desperate attempts to save their religion from its primitive, superstitious past. For example, a modernist in the Church of England believes, it is said, in a God who works through evolutionary processes. His Jesus did not perform miracles and was not born of a virgin. The tomb was not empty. Ethics are more important to the modernist than doctrine. Is the resurrection of Christianity any more likely than that of Jesus Christ?
The resurrection of Jesus Christ may be possible, but not the resurrection of Christianity. In fact, Jesus never died on the cross. The Jewish cross takes at least 48 hours for a person to die. And there have been known cases where people have existed almost 6 days on the cross without dying. Because the Jesus was taken down from the cross only after 6 hours. There is no possibility of his dying on the cross. It was a conspiracy between a rich sympathizer of Jesus and Pontius Pilate to crucify Jesus as late as possible on Friday, because on Saturday Jews stop everything. Their Sabbath does not allow any act. So by the evening of Friday, everything stops. The arrangement was that Jesus will be crucified late afternoon. So before sunset he is brought down. He may be unconscious because so much blood has flown out of the body, but he was not dead. Then he should be kept in a cave, and before Sabbath ends and Jews hang him again, his body should be stolen by his followers. The tomb was found empty. And Jesus was removed from Judea as quickly as possible. And as he was again healthy and healed, he moved to India. And he lived a long life, 112 years in Kashmir. It is a coincidence, but a beautiful coincidence, that Moses also died in Kashmir and Jesus also died in Kashmir. I have been to the graves of both. The graves are ample proof, because those are the only two graves which are not pointing towards Mecca. Mohammedans make their graves, the head pointing towards Mecca. So all the graves in the whole world of Mohammedans point towards Mecca. Kashmir is Mohammedan. These two graves don't point towards Mecca. And the writing on the graves is in Hebrew. Which is impossible on a Mohammedan grave. Hebrew is not their language. The name of Jesus is written exactly as it was pronounced by the Jews. Joshua. Jesus is a Christian conversion of the Jewish name. The grave is certainly of Jesus, because a family has been taken care of both the graves. They are very close in one place, Pahalgam. And only one family has been taken their care down the centuries. They are Jews. They are still Jews. I had to take their help to read me what is written on the graves. Moses had come to Kashmir to find a tribe of Jews which was lost on the way from Egypt to Jerusalem. And when he reached Jerusalem, his deep concern was the whole tribe that has lost somewhere in the desert. When his people were established in Jerusalem, he went in search of the lost tribe. And he found the last tribe established in Kashmir. Kashmiris are basically Jews. Later on, Mohammedans forcibly converted them. And Moses lived with them and died there. Jesus also reached Kashmir because now it was known that Moses has found the last tribe. The doors of Judea were closed. He will be hanged again. The only place where he will find the people who speak the same language, the people who have a same kind of mind, where he will not be a foreigner, was Kashmir. So it was natural for him to go to Kashmir. But he has learnt his lesson. He dropped that idea of the only begotten Son of God. Otherwise, these Jews will crucify him too. He dropped the idea of being a Messiah. He lived with his few intimate friends and followers in Pahalgam. Pahalgam is named after Jesus because he used to call himself the shepherd. Pahalgam means the town of the shepherd. So it was a small colony of Jesus and his friends. Surrounding the grave of their forefathers and the founders of Judaic tradition. Jesus remained a Jew to the very end. He never heard about Christianity. But the followers who were left in Judea managed to create the story of resurrection. And there was no way to prove this way or that. Neither they could produce Jesus. If he is resurrected, then where he is. Neither the other party could prove that what happened. They had put such a big rock on the mouth of the cave that it was impossible for Jesus to remove it. And there was a Roman soldier 24 hours on duty, so there was no possibility of anybody else to remove the rock and take the body. But because Pontius Pilate was from the very beginning was against crucifying Jesus, he could see the man is absolutely innocent. He has some crazy ideas, but they are not criminal. And what harm it does to somebody if someone thinks he is the only begotten Son of God. Let him enjoy it. Why disturb him? And why you get disturbed? If somebody thinks he is the Messiah and he has brought the message of God, if you want to listen, listen. If you don't want to listen, don't listen. But there is no need to crucify the man. But Jesus learned his lesson, learned the hard way. And in Kashmir, he lived very silently with his group, praying, peacefully living. No more trying to change the world. And Kashmir was so far away from Judea that in Judea the story of resurrection amongst the followers of Jesus became significant. So I say, a kind of resurrection certainly happened. It was a conspiracy more than a resurrection. But certainly Jesus did not die on the cross. He did not die in the cave where he was put. He lived long enough. But Christianity cannot even conspire to revive itself, to resurrect itself. There is a great movement in Christian theologians, and they are doing desperate efforts. Their very efforts so that they are going to fail. In fact, their efforts are ridiculous. There is one theologian who says there is no God, and we have to accept godless Christianity. He knows that it is impossible to prove God to the coming generation. To the young and the fresh mind, it is impossible to prove God. And the days of belief are over. It is a scientific age. You prove give the evidence, just by your saying, nobody is going to accept it. So he is ready to sacrifice God, but somehow to save Christianity. What will be Christianity without God? There is another theologian who is ready to believe that perhaps Jesus is only a myth. He never existed. Because it is as difficult to prove Jesus' existence as the existence of God. Because no contemporary literature even mentions his name. There is no proof other than those 4 Gospels of his own disciples. They cannot be called proof. So this theologian is willing to drop Jesus, but to save Christianity. But what Christianity will be? Without God, without Jesus. But they are so desperate to save Christianity that they don't see the implications of what they are doing. Another theologian says there have been no miracles. All miracles are just inventions of the followers. Up to now, for 2000 years, Christianity has depended on the miracles. Those were its basic foundations. To prove it a superior religion than any other religion. Because Gautam Buddha does not walk on water. Mahavira cannot revive a dead man. Krishna cannot heal the sick just by touching them. Muhammad cannot make wine out of water. These miracles have been for 2000 years the superiority of Christianity over all religions. Otherwise, what Christianity has got? But he is ready to drop the miracles because now they are continuously hammered. Nobody is ready to believe in them. They go against the very way things are, and nature does not change its rules, its laws for anybody. It does not take anybody as an exception. So the new theologian feels embarrassed. He knows himself that it is impossible to prove the miracles. I asked the Archbishop in Bombay that you represent Jesus. The Pope represents Jesus. You should at least do some little miracles as an evidence that you are really representatives. Otherwise, what have you got to prove that you are the representative? Walk on water, and the whole world will become Christian. And you say faith in Jesus can do miracles, then try it. You must have faith. But no theologian, neither any pope is ready to walk on water. They all know that nature does not change its laws for anybody. So it is a bold step, but very dangerous. If you take away all the miracles of Jesus, then a very poor man, just a carpenter's son, is left behind, with nothing to be compared with Gautam Buddha or Mahavir or Zarathustra. Really, you take away all his glory, which depends on miracles. But you cannot prove miracles. And because you cannot prove miracles, you create suspicion about Jesus. So it is better to drop miracles. At least suspicion about Jesus will be dropped. But you don't understand the implication. Without miracles, Jesus means nothing. Without miracles, Buddha remains the same, because he never did any miracle. People loved him not for his miracles. People loved him for his clarity of perception, of seeing into the very roots of things, of giving insights to people to transform life. Walking on water is simply stupid, even if you can do it. Then too it is not a miracle, it is simply stupidity. Because you will remain the same. You will not come out of water a transformed human being. Just to give you the idea how Gautam Buddha and Jesus will behave in a similar situation. Lazarus is dead. His sisters are great devotees. Lazarus was a great friend of Jesus. They send the message to him that, come, Lazarus is dead, and they keep his body inside a cave. And Jesus comes and he calls Lazarus. Standing outside the grave, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus says, have you come? Great, I am coming. And he comes out. It seems to be dramatic. It seems to be all planned. It seems the man was not dead. He was a friend. His two sisters were devotees. As if he was simply sitting there, waiting. But it is not a miracle. And even if it is a miracle, even if Lazarus comes back to life, he is not transformed. We don't hear anything else again of Lazarus. A man who has died, a man who has gone through the process of death to the beyond, comes back, cannot be the same. Lazarus would have become a great master, but he remains the same person. No change at all. In a similar situation, Gautam Buddha behaves differently, and I think that is the way any wise man will behave. A woman, Kisa Gautami, had only one son. Her husband has died. Her other children have died. She has seen death in its brutal ugliness. Only one son has remained, and she was living only for him. Otherwise, there was nothing for her to live. She wanted to kill herself. She has lost everything. All those people she has loved and lived for. But his neighbors suggested that one son is alive. Without you, he will also be dead. Take care of him. We understand your sorrow. But one day that boy also died. And Kisa Gautami got completely mad. It was a coincidence that Buddha was staying in the same city of Sravasti, and somebody suggested to Kissa Gautami that a great mystic is here. Why don't you take your son to him? He can do anything. He is a man of tremendous power. Seeing your situation and knowing his compassion, something is possible. Perhaps your son may come back to life. And Kissa Gautami went with the dead body. She put the body in the feet of Gautam Buddha and said that I have lost everything, all my children, my husband. I was living only for this son. Now he is also dead. I have heard much about your compassion. Now is the time to sow it. Let my son get up again. Resurrect him. Buddha said, on one condition. You go in the town to resurrect your child. I need few mustard seed. But this should be from a family where nobody has ever died. Kissa Gautami was not in a state of mind to think that this is impossible. The condition cannot be fulfilled. She went from one house to another, and people said, we can give you as much mustard seeds as you want. We can fill our bullock carts with mustard seeds and bring them to Gautam Buddha if your son can be revived back. But our mustard seeds won't help, because not only one, but thousands may have died in our family. Generations after generations, people have been dying. These mustard seeds are not to fulfill the condition. And she went on, and the same was the answer everywhere. She went to the king of Sravasti and told him, can't you do me just a small thing, few mustard seeds, and my son can be back alive. The king said, you can have as many mustard seeds as you want. But the woman said, there is a condition. And the condition is that in your family no one should have died. And your family is royal. Certainly you will fulfill my condition. The king said with tears in his eyes that royal are not royal. death makes no difference. My father has died, my son has died, and unaccountable people must have died in my family before I was born. You have to forgive me. I can give you anything you want, but that condition cannot be fulfilled. The whole day going round the city, the woman became alert of a fact that death is inevitable, today or tomorrow. After seeing the king, she came back to Buddha, touched his feet, and said, "Please forgive me. I was asking you something against nature. And you are wise enough not to say no to me. But you gave me an opportunity to understand that my asking is wrong. You initiate me. I don't have anything to live for, but I would like to know what it is that lives and what it is that dies." Buddha initiated her, and she became one of the great meditators in his followers. Now, which one you think is a miracle? Lazarus or Kissa Gautami? Which one do you think is doing the miracle? Jesus or Gautam Buddha? Gautam Buddha is not doing a miracle at all. But if you understand it rightly, he is doing the miracle because he is changing the woman from a mad state into a meditative state. And even if Lazarus becomes alive, he remains Lazarus. And one day he will die again. So what is the point? But Christianity has depended on these miracles, proving its superiority over other religions. In fact, those religions are far superior because they don't depend on such stupid, childish ideas. So there are theologians who are ready to drop all miracles, but if you drop all miracles, then Jesus is left naked. You have taken all his clothes. He has nothing to give to the world. One theologian takes God away. Another theologian makes Jesus himself a myth. Another theologian takes miracles away. And the fourth theologian takes religion itself away. He wants a religion-less Christianity. But Christianity has to remain. I don't understand, when you have taken all the contents, why killing with the box? Now even religion has to be taken away, because half of the humanity is already religionless. The communists don't believe in religion. And the communists are not only in the communist countries, that is the half of humanity. Communists are in other countries also. In fact, 3/4 of humanity has already dropped religion. The remaining ones are only formally religious. They are not much disturbed by the idea of taking religion out. But then what remains? Just it seems you are clinging with the label, the name Christianity. It is desperate effort, and stupid too. Why not accept that Christianity is dead? God is dead, miracles are dead, religion is dead. Jesus is no more born out of a Virgin Mary. So what you are saving? I have been looking into all these theologians which are prominent people in the Christian world. They have taken all the contents, only an empty box. But why carry on this empty box? For what reason? Just an old habit, an old attachment. And then there is another effort, because you cannot carry an empty box long. You will also feel that you are doing something foolish. And others will start feeling, when they will look into your box, that you have a great Christianity. Jesus is missing, God is missing, miracles are not there, Virgin Mary is not there, all that was Christianity is not there. Then why you are carrying this empty box? So there is another effort going on side by side to fill the box with something. So Christian theologians are studying other religions to have something similar. It is going to be imitation, unauthentic, because it is not their experience. Now they call it comparative religion. In all Christian colleges, they study comparative religion. I asked the professors and the principals of those colleges, why you should be worried about other religions? You have Christianity. But the need is that they have to fill the box with something. So from other religions, they are collecting ideas. They are studying psychoanalysis. Now every Christian preacher has compulsorily to study psychoanalysis. Now what psychoanalysis has to do with religion? But the problem is what religion used to do to console people in their misery. Now they don't have that religion at all. They have to find out something contemporary to console people. And psychoanalysis is a very thriving business all around the world. The most highly paid professionals are psychoanalysts. So they must be doing to people something. Learn their art and use to save Christianity. But you don't understand that Freud was against religion. The whole psychoanalysis is against religion. You cannot use it. They are studying Karl Marx because the man has converted 3/4 of humanity. He must have something. The idea of equality of human beings. Although he is against religion and against God, but he has certain values. Those values can be taken. And they are collecting all kinds of things in the box where Christianity used to be. It is so eclectic that it does not make one organic whole. If you look into the box, you will get into a madness. Because the things they are taking belong to different systems. In those systems, they have a living quality. Out of those systems, they are dead. Somebody's eyes, somebody's hand, somebody's legs, somebody's heart. And do you think in your box there will come a man? Because you have arranged everything that is needed for a man. Hands, head, eyes, heart, everything is there, but it is just nonsense Those eyes were able to see in an organic unity in a body. Now they cannot see, and there is no organic unity, and you cannot bring an organic unity. Christianity is dead. Their desperate effort to save it simply confirms that it is dead. But it needs guts to accept it. You will be surprised to know that when Joseph Stalin died, it was not declared to the world. It took few days for the Communist High Command, because they had believed that man is immortal. Stalin, man of steel, he cannot die. But men of steel are, whatever your conception may be, has to follow the nature. He died. Few days they delayed to inform the world. In fact, they could not believe it. But finally, they had to accept that Stalin is dead. The same happened with Mao Zedong. His death was not immediately reported to the world, because he has become a god. I know about Sri Aurobindo because he himself was teaching his whole life that his special work is to give methods to people to attain physical immortality. All old teachers have taught you spiritual immortality. That's not a big problem, because the spiritual element in you is already immortal. He used to say that I am doing the real thing. Physical body which is not immortal, and I am going to make it immortal. And one day he died. One of my friends was there in Pondicherry in his ashram. He told me that for 7 days we were hiding the fact that Aurobindo has died. We could not believe ourselves, because if he himself is not immortal, then what about us who have gathered here just to become physically immortal? And the man who was going to make us physically immortal is dead. And now we cannot even ask him that you deceived us, what happened? And to declare it to the world, it looks so embarrassing. The chief disciple, the mother of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, finally found a solution to it. She said, he is not dead. He has gone in deep samadhi. The deepest that anyone has ever gone. He will wake up again. He is simply asleep. They made a marble grave for him with all the comforts because he was just sleeping. And one day he is going to wake up. This is his last experiment about physical immortality. Then years passed. He did not knock from the grave. People started suspecting. But the mother was over 90 and she was still preaching physical immortality. Then one day she died. And it is very difficult for believers because believers have some investment. Their investment is their own immortality. If both the leaders are dead, then there is no hope for them. And they have not yet told them the real secret. They were telling that they are working about it. Sri Aurobindo used to give audience only once a year to his disciples. The remaining year he was working constantly. That was the idea in the ashram for physical immortality. Now both are lying in their graves, and there are still idiots living in the ashram believing that they will awake one day. Idiots are also miracles. They still believe. My friend who has been there and still is there is a doctor of philosophy. But he still believes. He had been coming to see me, but there is no way to convince. I tried every possible way, but he said, Patanjali himself says in Yoga Sutras that Samadhi and Susupti, Samadhi and deep sleep are exactly alike. So they have gone into deep sleep to find out the secret of physical immortality. I said, but how long it will take? By that time you all will be dead. Even if they come, and you just go and open the grave, and you will know that it is no more sleep. There are only skeletons. Stinking of death, not the fragrance of immortality. But the believer is such that he goes on believing, because his belief is basically for a reason. He is afraid that perhaps they are dead, but then what about him? And that stops him, the idea that they are dead. Do you see the point? He cannot accept that Sri Aurobindo and the mother are dead, because that means he will have to die. And he does not want to die, that's why he has come and lived there for years, waiting for the secret to be revealed. He will wait. They are asleep and working. Desperate efforts, and they happen only when something is really gone and you don't have it. Then you get in a frenzy of creating some way that you can continue to believe in it. For example, the Bible believes that God created the world 4,004 years before Jesus Christ. That is only 6,000 years from now. Now that is proved so abundantly that it is absolutely wrong. In India we have found cities which were lying hidden underneath the earth, 7,000 years old. And not ordinary cities. I have been to Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, both are in Pakistan now. And it is something to see. 7,000 is the very orthodox idea. There are scholars who say they must be more than 15,000 years old. And even if they are 7,000 years old, there must have been a long past to those cities, because that kind of cities cannot be created instantly. They have bigger roads than New York. Now a city 7,000-year-old having a wider road than New York means they must be having vehicles, traffic. Otherwise, why create such a road? They have beautiful bathrooms. They had a running system of water. Even if they were 7,000 years old, they must have developed for thousands of years to come to such technology, to such plumbing, that they can have running water in their bathrooms, in their houses. They have swimming pools. In China, we have found human bodies frozen in ice, 90,000 years old. Now, when all these facts came to the Christian theologians, there was great turmoil what to do, because God created the world 6,000 years before. I am giving you this example how a desperate believer functions. One theologian came with the idea, which became accepted by the whole Christianity, that God created the world exactly as it is said in the Bible 6,000 years before, with cities under the earth, with bathrooms, with plumbing, with wide roads, with 90,000-year-old bodies, just to test your faith. God can do anything. If He can create the world, do you think He cannot create a body that looks 90,000 years old? To all scientific investigation. But the world was created 6,000 years before. A desperate effort to cling to superstitions. But there comes a point when all your superstitions are proved, then this situation arises that you start saying that they are all superstitions and we can drop them and still we can save Christianity. You cannot. Those superstitions have been the very backbone of your Christianity. Without those superstitions, your Christianity will lose all its life. And it will be more absurd to believe in a Christianity devoid of all superstitions, miracles, God, even religion. Now they are saying it is only ethics, not doctrine. But ethics need not be Christian. Ethics has nothing to do with Christianity. Ethics is a science in itself. I have been a teacher of ethics, and I had never thought about that ethics can be Christian. Ethics thinks about what is truth, what is good, what is bad. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do something with your actions. And it is the same for everybody. Whether you are in Tibet or in China or in America, it does not make any difference. The ethical standard will be the same. Ethics is a science completely in itself. Now, finding nothing, they are falling on ethics. That the essential thing is not doctrine, because all their doctrines are proved wrong. Up to now it was doctrine. Now, because all doctrines are proved wrong, or at least questionable, and they have not been able substantially to support their doctrines and their truth. This is the last effort of a dying religion. Drop those doctrines. They are dangerous. They are killing you. So jump upon something else that can give you a resurrection. But ethics is purely a science in itself. It thinks about values which have nothing to do with Hindu, Mohammedan or Christian. Ethics is not going to save, and it is not going to give a resurrection. There is no possibility for Christianity. And it will be good that they accept it and drop the dead body. It is a great load, and unnecessarily carrying it, you are missing your life. And living with a dead religion, you are bound to become dead. Your churches are graveyards. There is no song of life. There is no dance of existence. It is better to simply get out of the old habit. These are just old habits. I don't know why Christian priests, nuns, bishops, why their clothes are called habits, I don't know. But one thing I know, just drop the habits, whatever it means. Just be natural and human. And it is not only a question of Christianity. Your question was concerned about Christianity. Otherwise, the same is the situation about other religions. Man has come of age, and he does not need those old superstitious religions. He needs a more scientific approach to explore his being. And that will be possible only if he gets rid of the old habits. And they are very dirty because for thousands of years the same habits have been used by so many people. They are stinking. Get out of those habits as quickly as possible.
If we don't ask you questions, how are we going to play with you?
That's really a question. It will be difficult. So whether you have the questions or not, still you can go and ask them. Your question need not be yours, but it must be somebody else somewhere. And my answer may help somebody somewhere, sometime. So let us continue the game. I cannot say anything on my own. Unless there is a question, I am silent. Because of the question, it is possible for me to respond. So it does not matter whether the question is yours. What matters is that the question is bound to be somebody somewhere. And I am not only answering you, I am answering through you the whole humanity. Not only the contemporary humanity, but also the humanity that will be coming, when I will not be here to answer. So find out all possible angles and question. So anybody, even in the future when I am not here, has a question, can find an answer in my words. To us, it is a play. To somebody, it may become really a question of life and death.
Without questions, and thus without doubt, how can intelligence continue to flourish?
It is true in the beginning, doubt helps your intelligence, sharpens it. Questioning makes you aware of many possibilities of which you may not have been aware before. But this is only the beginning of the journey. At the end, when all your questions have disappeared, and the real master never gives you the answer. Let me repeat it. The real master never gives you the answer, so you cannot doubt it. He brings you to a point where all your questions disappear. His answers are murderous, killing your questions, destroying them mercilessly, to bring you to a point where there is no question in your consciousness, and the Master does not give you any answer that you can doubt. This non-questioning consciousness is the answer, and it is your experience. You cannot doubt it. It is there. And from this point, silence and intelligence are just two aspects of the same thing. From this point, not knowing innocence and knowing are two aspects of the same thing. This is the mysterious world which is available to you if you can pass the jungle of questions and doubts and reach into the clear, where there are no questions and no doubts, no answers either. Just you are with utter silence, with immense clarity, with tremendous sharpness. That's why I am against belief, because it will never allow you to reach to this stage. It will stop you in the very beginning of the journey. It will not help to make you more intelligent. It will make you more unintelligent. It will make you more fanatic, superstitious. But it will not allow you to come into the clarity which can be called the very goal of what transpires between master and the disciple. The moment of total silence, the moment where everything is crystal clear. But it has to be earned. Belief is cheap. This will bring you something totally different, what I call trust in existence. In the dictionaries, trust and belief and faith are all synonymous, but not in reality. Belief is opposite to trust. You believe because you have doubt. The belief is an antidote to doubt. It is a need to cover up the doubt. Trust when you don't have any doubt. So trust is not a belief. Belief is always in something, in some doctrine, in some principle, in some philosophy. Trust is in the totality of the cosmos. It has nothing to do with books, holy Bibles, Gitas, Qurans, no. Then there is only one scripture. Which is spread all around you, in the trees, in the rivers, in the ocean, in the stars. And you don't have to read it. You have to be just silent, and it starts showering on you all its wisdom, which is eternal. I am against belief because I want you to come to the point of trust.